Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Canvas, the podcast that explores the impact of generative AI on businesses, the arts, and our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Foster, co-founder of Applied Data Science Partners and author of the book Generative Deep Learning, Teaching Machines to Paint, Write, Compose, and Play. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll be diving deep into fascinating conversations with a diverse range of thought leaders, including musicians, artists, journalists, educators, marketers, lawyers, and those at the cutting edge of this fascinating field. We'll explore their unique insights into the opportunities and potential threats of deploying this technology across industries and how it's going to reshape our world. We have a fascinating conversation ahead of us, so sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of generative AI right here on the AI Canvas. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of the AI Canvas, the podcast where we explore the impact of generative AI on businesses, the arts, and society in general. I'm your host, David Foster, and today we have an amazing guest lined up for you, someone who is truly passionate about education and the transformative power it can have on people's lives. I'm thrilled to introduce Derek Hills, the Director of IT, Data and Systems at ARC, a multi-academy trust in the UK with nearly 30,000 pupils across its schools. Derek's been working in education since 2009, leveraging his expertise in data analytics to drive positive change in the sector. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for what's sure to be an enlightening conversation about the role of generative AI in education and how it can revolutionize the way we learn and grow. So stay tuned and let's paint the future on the AI Canvas. So Derek, great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Really, great to have you. It's a really interesting background. I'm so glad to be talking to you about this because it's something that's I've got particular passion in education, and it's kind of colliding with my interest in generative AI, and I can't wait to see what happens in the sector. Mm-hmm. Perhaps could you just start by giving us a brief overview of your journey to where you've got today? Before we get onto the generative AI stuff, just give us a little bit of background to yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I think when I left university, I actually started off working in financial services. And this sounds really, really cliched, but it didn't do anything for me. I'm one of them people where I feel like I need to have a purpose. I actually wanted to be a surgeon, but that's another story for another time. But I had a fantastic upbringing in terms of, love and things like that, but I had a terrible experience at school. I went to what we would describe as a sink school. And when the opportunity came to work in education and to transfer some of those skills that I'd learned at university and financial services into that sector, I actually thought, wow, I think I could make a difference here. And when you're from that background where you probably don't get the best start in life, I think it's really important to choose a career where you have a vested interest. And 14 years on, I'm still doing it now. I'm paying for the sins of being a truant at school, so I think I've paid that back now. And some.
I guess technology therefore has changed so much in those years that you've been in education, and I guess you've seen that transformative power that it can have for pupils. Like you said, if you say your background was one where you wish you'd have perhaps had that opportunity when you were at school, have you seen that in schools that you've worked in?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. When I first started in education, I tell a story I tell everybody. My first day in a school, I was made to sit in the isolation room and look after the naughtiest kids there. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire from someone who's never worked in a school before. But this teacher said to me, how do you work out the percentage difference between two numbers? Now, you and I would find that, and so would they, find it very easy. But I asked the question, I said, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? She said, well, that's what we do. And I said, well, from this day on, you will not do that. I would be a terrible teacher. Lockdown proved that with teaching my kids at home, asking what a conjugated verb was, and I was having to shout at my wife when she was upstairs. I said, I can do maths, but not English. So, education going back 10, 13, 14 years, 14 years that I've been in it, was what I would describe as a cottage industry. Every single school did something different. It was all based on spreadsheets and scraps of paper, and things just got missed. And that's not through lack of effort. It's just because we didn't have the sophistications of systems to be able to triangulate data, to try and look for root cause effect, and
Mm.
to try and use data as a driver. People say that data drives change in schools. It doesn't. Great leaders drive change in schools. Data is
Mm-hmm.
there to inform them to make the right decisions or to answer the questions that they're seeking to answer. And if I could take, obviously we haven't got time today, but if I could show you everything that I've built in the last decade,
Mm.
what you would see from the very beginnings would look very, very basic, and what you would see as I've evolved through my career and as the sector has evolved through my career, we're actually becoming we've actually professionalized data in education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember, I mean, from my days as a teacher, even the short time that I was in the sector, I remember even then the transformation that I saw was amazing. Things like smart boards
Yeah,
were just about the time when I was teaching, and even moving from paper registers to
yeah.
a management information system. And I suppose my question to you would therefore be, what would you say has been the biggest impact of technology? Is it in the classroom and the kind of tools that the kids are using to learn, or
Yeah.
would you say it's on that kind of back end architecture, so capturing information on attainment and performance and attendance, and therefore using that data to better make decisions about children's futures?
Well, my experience in the classroom is zero, as I've alluded to. But even in my time, I remember visiting. Before I worked at ARC, I worked for a fantastic multi-academy trust called Harris Federation. I remember this is going back 10 years probably. We're going into a school and seeing visualizers in the classroom and seeing how technology. This was in the primary school with a fantastic head teacher at the time called Lindy Davidson. Using technology in the school to really enrich their experience. I saw kids running around the school wearing headphones, and this seems quite low tech, obviously, but running around the school, and they all had individual personalized recorded message on their headphones, and they were doing treasure hunts and things like that. And
Mm,
to me, that was. I remember when I was at secondary school, we had one PC between 30 kids,
yeah.
and we all used to sit around it almost like warming our hands on the fire because we were so excited that there was a computer. And I left school in 2000, so it's not a long time ago. I suspect we're a similar age. So, but I can only tell you about the back end, and I think that we've evolved because of improvements in the MIS. There's no two ways about that. I used to use two systems, one called Facility CMIS and obviously Sims, which was then and still is the market leader in terms of volume. And they are very good at doing the basics very well. There's no two
Mm,
ways about that. But the new modern cloud MIS have come along, particularly Arbor and Bromcom,
mhm.
and they have in some ways shown the sector the art of the possible, showing you what you can do with analytics, showing you what you can do. Multi-academy trusts have definitely driven this as well because of the desire to see your organisation in one place.
Mm,
Before, schools would work in silos, even within multi-academy trusts, they would work in silos. And great mats like Harris and ARC and United Learning, AET, etc. There's many more, but they're the ones that I know.
yeah.
Have driven this desire to be able to almost, for want of a better phrase, put a corporate slant on their data. Very briefly,
Yeah.
I used to work for Nestle, and used to make Kit Kats in York, and they made them in Bulgaria. They tasted exactly the same because they were able to bring in that compliance, those checks.
Hmm.
And I think that part of the MAP model is that we're able to support our schools with the heavy lifting when it comes to analytics and um, supporting them with lines of inquiry and triangulation and all the other things that comes from great data.
Yeah. And do you think so? Something we talk about in data and analytics often is this idea of transforming from descriptive analytics through predictive and then prescriptive or proactive analytics,
Mm.
which is where you're taking decisions and optimizing ahead of time. Where do you think we are in the education sector on that curve? Because I guess what you talked about there is about good quality foundational descriptive analytics.
Yeah.
Do you think the sector is at the point yet where they're using things like predictive analytics or even proactively taking decisions as a result of data? Or do you think there's still more work that needs to be
Uh,
done there?
Absolutely. I think there's more work to be done. I think a lot of this comes down to investment. I still think there's a huge gap in across the sector in how much they are prepared, or can even not even so much prepared, but how much they can afford to invest in this sector. I've been lucky to work for two organisations that have invested relatively heavily in this.
Mm,
Um, and at ARC, we are using some basics of predictive modelling. One of the things that is quite exciting is there are things like the Microsoft OEA, which is looking to harness more the power of information more across more schools, which I think will lead more into moving on to those next steps. I just don't think that we have the expertise. I don't think we have the infrastructure to be able to do that at the moment. There's definitely a desire to do it. I mean, my dream would be that we could, not we as an ARC, but we as a sector can predict the decline of a school before it becomes too deep set that that it needs to be
Mm-hmm.
rebrokered to another mat, or ultimately the pupils suffer. And I think that we have the data as an organisation to be able to do that. I just don't think we necessarily have the tools and the skills to do so.
Yeah, that's really interesting point that you make there around funding and the democratization, I guess, of these tools and systems, and that it's not just the schools that have the money that should have access to them, but really every school in an ideal world should be able to be doing great analytics on their data, ultimately to help the pupils, because that's where that whole sector is focused.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about generative AI, as obviously on this podcast, that's the core topic that we talk about, and particularly things like Chat GPT. I mean, this is a technology that's been around 4 or 5 months now. Have you seen it start to creep into schools, either from a perspective of teachers using it or IT staff using it, or from the other angle of students actually wanting to start using this within their lessons or within the classroom or at home as well? Is it a technology that you think is going to drive as much transformational change as, say, the MIS systems that you've already talked about?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's inevitable. I think I've got a teacher that works with me, a chap called Tommy, who's fantastic with technology, and he's already using it for making model lesson plans. And he said that
Mm,
they're actually really high quality. In terms of me and my team, I mean, I've used it to when I've written some presentations. I've used it to help me frame arguments. I've used it to sense check what I've written.
mm-hmm,
But I would say that there are some risks to that. It's not particularly accurate. Um, as
mm-hmm.
someone who's from York and supports West Ham, which is it's a strange mix, it turns out there's one player in history that's played for both teams. And I asked ChatGPT if there was any more, and it came back with 4 players, and none of them had played for York.
Yeah.
So I think that whilst it's a fantastic tool to sense check, I think you still need to have that core knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
One of the players that came up was Matty Holland, who I don't know him personally, but I know him as a player, and I knew he'd never played for York, so I was able to go, hang on a minute, I don't look right. So I think to go back into your question about pupils, I think it's inevitable that they'll be using it. I think probably more in HE and FE
Mm-hmm.
than obviously in primary and secondary. Without doubt that pupils will be using it. When you and I were at university, I had to write a paper once on the management theories. I think it was of Elton Mayo or somebody. If my memory recalls. There's no chance in the world I would write that. I'd be straight on ChatGPT and it would be writing
For
it for me.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
especially because it was a topic that bored me. So,
Yeah.
um, but I just think that I said this before. This is technology now that I'm 40 this year. It's not something that's it's not I'm past my I like to think I'm someone that learns every day, but I'm through my education now. We've got to
Mm-hmm.
empower the next generation to be able to use this effectively. I think we need to make sure we've got safeguards in place to protect them, which I'm sure we'll come on to about the ethics and of using technology of this kind. But
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that we need to embrace and be excited by, and see it as an opportunity, um, rather than being fearful of it. Obviously, there are risks, and we need to be mindful of them. But I think if we see it as something that's positive, then we'll make the best of it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you say that, because that's my view as well. I've met people who say we should be banning this in schools, and that it's something ultimately that's going to detract from the educational experience. And I agree with you that the problem with that argument is people are going to be using this going forward into the future in their jobs and their everyday lives. They're going to be seeing it in tools that they use every day anyway, like Microsoft Word, etc. So just to say, well, let's ban it and let's put it on
Yeah,
some sort of blanket regulation, it just isn't realistic. It would be the same as saying let's ban the internet in schools, in my
great.
opinion.
Yeah,
So look, I mean, the question that's going to be on everyone's lips listening to this, I think, if they're in the sector, is how do we manage this change, right? Because this is all about change management. There's a new technology that didn't exist 6 months ago. So how does the sector take the steps necessary to, as you say, put in regulation and put in guidance, I guess, for pupils without making this the enemy and treating it like something that's, the forbidden fruit, as it were, to sort of to steer clear of. But, it's here if you really want to try it. How do we put the regulation and guidance in place for children, do you think, to be able to use these tools effectively?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's probably one well above my pay grade. I think really something like this, I think the policy probably needs to come from central government. I think it's going to have such a huge impact, and I know the Department for Education are working on this. My biggest fear is that it's here now, and we've got, not we as an AIC, but we as a sector have got teachers that are no doubt using this. I would have concerns that teachers might feel that they can put pupil data into this and it can come up with great threads for them to investigate. But however, there's obviously significant risk to do that. I just don't think there's been enough communication as a sector on how to use this effectively, how to use this safely. I think there are, again, the mats that I listed before, we'll all be looking at this very, very closely. We're looking at it, actually, our big focal point at ARC is how can we use this as a tool to reduce workload. Actually, that's our first port of call. But I just think at the moment, I think everyone's got this kind of disparate view on how to use it. There don't seem to be any collaboration, and I think that comes, personally, I think that probably needs to come from central government, or bring together, some of the great mats that are out there and local authority schools and come up with a plan of how we embrace this technology properly.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen some guidance that's been put out by the body that oversees all of the examinations in the UK, and talking about AI being used in things like essays, and talking about how, is it the same as plagiarism if someone just types their essay title into Chat GPT and gets back an answer and submits that? Should we be treating that in the same way as we treat plagiarism? And the guidance goes into detail around things like referencing AI as a source. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that in general, not necessarily just in education, but do you think it's important that people, if they're reading something, that they know if it's AI generated? Just briefly, my opinion on this is that it's very hard to draw the line between AI generated and not AI generated. Like you say, your teacher there who used it to generate a lesson plan, he or she after that has probably gone into a lot of detail understanding that lesson plan and putting together a great lesson. So why should that person be penalized or sort of have to announce that this lesson plan was AI generated? It's not. I don't think it's as black and white as people are making out. So yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of declaration of AI usage, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest with you. I think when I was at university, I'm sure I would have borrowed the odd bit from the internet and not referenced it effectively. Just picked a few words around to make sure that no one could Google it and trap me. Hands up. I think we've all done that.
Yeah.
I think you make a great point about the lesson plan example. There's no way that people would just take it verbatim and stick it on a PowerPoint and expect the kids to learn from that. Even when you might work in a multi-academy trust where the lesson plans are provided for you, people still personalise them and make sure that they're in their style and they suit the demographics of the pupils that they serve. So it's a conundrum, that one. I mean, I don't think I can give you my opinion would be that it's just difficult. I mean, at what point does it become your work? It's like a recipe. I like to cook. I take recipe books. I change 2 or 3 ingredients. Is it my recipe or have I taken it from a book?
Exactly.
So, if you're asking me personally, I'd say it's my recipe. So, I think if you take the words from ChatGPT verbatim and just dump it in a Word document and pass it off as your own. I think there was an example, was there not, from Cardiff University, where a student handed in 2 pieces of work, one that he'd written and one that was done by ChatGPT, and the ChatGPT one got first, and I think that he got a 2-1 or a 2-2. So in those instances, I think maybe we should, but I think if you're using it for sense checking, or if you're using it to spark an idea, or just to give you a little bit of context of something that you're trying to understand, I see that to be no different than taking out a couple of books, not necessarily referencing that. You don't always reference a book directly because you might read 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And just pick up a thread that you then take on yourself. So difficult one.
Yeah, it is difficult. Like I say, it's a grey area. I think there's going to have to be a dialogue at sort of the highest levels of government about what we wants children to be doing in the classroom, and the change, I guess, if you like, between in the past where people used to go into exams and we were saying, well, look, examination conditions just aren't like real life, so we need to move to coursework. That's more preparing children for the real world. But now there's almost like, well, we need to do something under time conditions and under control conditions, because now we've got this incredible tool that kind of takes away the personalization of a child's response to a question or a young adult's response. I wanted to ask you about recruitment as well, because obviously as director, you'll be recruiting under you for your teams.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it will start to creep into things like CV writing, cover letter writing, and it will become harder and harder to detect who the candidates are you should bring in for interview. I don't know if you've seen anything like this already, or if you think it's something that will be on the horizon, but what are your thoughts on that?
Not knowingly, there is a lady who works in my team that wrote an email asking for some holiday recently and got ChatGPT to write it, which I thought was quite interesting. Which really she could have just put, "Can I have a holiday?" and we would have said yes, but
Yeah.
she was just investigating what it could do. Again, for me with a CV, I think that I much prefer to meet people and speak to them in person. And I think that you can flip that back round to there's a coursework element. Whenever someone does coursework, AI will never replace knowledge. I think if someone presents a fantastic piece of work, getting them to stand up and explain their understanding verbally of that topic, you'll find out who's completely plagiarized it against those that have used it to enrich them. Same with a CV and a covering letter. As soon as you speak to someone and start talking to them, you pretty much know what's true and what's not true. I think that there's definitely a place in society as well for CVs where they are anonymized and you don't know too much about the candidate to remove bias. So maybe AI can be used for that, for stripping out any identifying criteria. But again, it comes down to that. It will never replace that interpersonal connection between two humans and being able to make that judgment.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we move back towards a world where that interpersonal connection is paramount and comes above anything that you could write down on a piece of paper. We've had in recent times, obviously, the extreme example of that, where the interpersonal connection through the pandemic was almost taken away from everyone, and we realised how awful that is, to live through. And I hope that this technology almost pushes us in the opposite direction, and that we end up having to be forced to make decisions based on real life connections rather than take everything into the digital space. Because I guess up till now the push towards digital has always been, well, it's easier, it's quicker. Meeting in person is cumbersome, it's time consuming. But I think what a technology like this has the power to do is take us back the other way and say, well, now you can't do that because there's no way to tell what's real, what's fake. The only way is just a conversation, face to face. Let's dig into the detail and see if we click. So I totally agree with you. Basically, I think even for children in the classroom, like you say, doing some sort of viva alongside an essay is going to be something we see more of.
Yeah.
And that it's not just the piece of paper that gets marked, but it's your response to what you've written.
Yeah.
That reflects real life as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so another question for you. In terms of you've got particular passion for improving the opportunities for disadvantaged students. I think there's a huge opportunity here to really bring the best of technology to those that need it the most. Could you just talk a little bit through, how you think generative AI might be able to help those where they're unable to get, one-to-one teacher support as easily as other children, or they're from a background where they don't have at home the opportunities that other students have? How do you think this technology is going to change their lives, and what are the most positive examples of this that you can foresee happening in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, not being a teacher, I take my hat off to the way that they differentiate or adapt their learning to be able to provide a great education for everyone in their class, no matter what that pupil's challenge. But in terms of technology, I mean, for me, there are some great examples out there now, David, where pupils can read a book and it can scan the eye and it can pick up where they haven't got the comprehension, or words that they're struggling on. I heard something about one of the football teams, it might be Liverpool, using AI to look at players' capillaries in their face to look for fatigue. If you
Mm.
change that to a classroom environment, again with my non-teacher hat on, could you imagine having the ability as a teacher when you're talking about something for it to flag that a pupil just doesn't get that topic, or is being
Mm-hmm.
lost, or isn't paying attention, or messing around? Even on the less positive side of that use of technology, I see that as a fantastic opportunity to support the teacher. Um, Obviously, the pupil would be the ultimate recipient of that
Mm.
technology, but from a teacher's perspective, I imagine that would be incredibly powerful. In terms of home learning, I can only talk about my own personal experience. My daughter's 9, going on 10, or going on 15 sometimes. And we were using it, just playing around the weekend before last, actually, just saying, can you give us some 10 questions on fractions for a 9-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it was an American, so it was like if I had 3 dimes and a quarter, I was like, I don't know what a dime is. We'll skip that one. But it was, what I showed her the first couple, and after that, she practically ripped the laptop out of my hands and did it herself. I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting
Yeah.
that a child can ask a question, or can test their own knowledge, or can insert, again, I've never done this, but I can imagine it could read a story to them. That some,
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity. I was lucky. My mum used to read to me every day. I know there are people out there that don't get that opportunity, unfortunately.
Mm.
Not just in this country, but throughout the world. Why could they not use this technology for them to read a bedtime story, or
Mm-hmm.
for them to talk about what's happening in the world, in a positive way, so that they can keep on top of not current affairs, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah, yeah, it's a great idea.
yeah,
Mm.
what's going, not necessarily, not necessarily want to be depressing them with current affairs, but some of the lighter things that are going on in the world, that when they
Mm.
go back to school the next day, they don't feel like they've been left behind their peers who have parents that talk to them about what's going on in the world, and read great stories to them, and some of the great authors that I was brought up with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say, without wanting to sound cliche, it enriches your life.
Mm.
And unfortunately, not every pupil has that opportunity, and maybe this could be that bridge.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's something that can be used to, I guess, level the playing field. And that's how I'd sort of describe it. I don't think it's something that's going to turbocharge every child's education. But I do think there's a place for it in the classroom, but also at home, to help with assisted learning and also personalized learning. Um, and in fact, just on that point, I wonder if, just to kind of bounce some ideas between us, and like yourself, I've been a long time out of the classroom, so we're talking as two non-teachers here, but I can imagine the power of this for a student to be able to ask questions to it with no sort of recourse for embarrassment,
Hmm.
or like it's just an objective view, and that is so powerful for a lot of kids who feel embarrassed about their lack of understanding. Um, I'd love to see more sort of products or software or tools being built that are focused around personalizing it to a student's data. And perhaps this comes back to your area of student data ultimately, and the stuff that you're capturing at a centralized level. Being able to feed this attainment data, attendance data, performance into something which can generate you a personalized learning plan or a personalized exam.
Hmm.
Um, do you think that's something that we're going to be seeing in the next few years?
Without a doubt, I can't see why we wouldn't be looking to. I mean, even just from a data analytics point of view, being able AI is coming into the MIS. So I know Bromcom have got a working example. I'm pretty sure that Arbor have either close to having one, or have one, which is fantastic. The opportunity, I think, for us as data geeks in the school, for want of a better phrase, to be able to say, how are my black Caribbean boys getting on, or how are my disadvantaged white boys getting on? Where are there any significant gaps or trends across the organisation? Look at attendance, look at behaviour, look at exclusions. We can do that, as humans, and,
Mm,
and, and quite well, but it's really time consuming,
mm,
and it takes a lot of people a long time to be able to do that effectively. And we miss things.
mm,
I think we will always have that grounded knowledge to be of what we're looking for, and I think it's just a way for us to be able to speed that up. And one of the things I loved about it when I first got into to doing this job was saying to the head teacher that I used to work with at the time, I've spotted this, and they'd go, wow,
mm.
we didn't know that. And to be able to amplify that up,
Yeah.
imagine, we've got 30,000 kids. You start doing that on a national level. I mean, think there's some fantastic opportunity. I was speaking to a CEO just last week, a chap called Paul Tan,
Mm-hmm.
who does some fantastic work with financial-led curriculum modeling. So, he designs his curriculum to be completely cost-effective, and AI could take that to another level. And look,
Yeah.
I think he said, I don't want to misquote it, I think he said there's 1.4 billion pounds of unused teaching hours in the sector. You know,
Mm.
being able to use AI for us to be able to identify that and put that money back into the classroom, that would go a long, long way to bridging this gap that we have for not just pupils with special learning needs, but pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. Pupils that are from a similar background to myself. Particularly white British disadvantaged pupils who are really, really struggling nationally. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
this technology could help us with that massively.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point there. I think, I remember when I was teaching, we were always taught, look, the best case scenario is that everyone in your class, whenever you test them, scores 70 to 80%.
Mhm.
Because what you don't want to do is do a blanket test across the class and one kid gets 10% and another kid in the class gets 100%, because the kid who's got 100% learns nothing. They just get a good fuzzy feeling that they're the best. And the kid who's got 10% just feels terrible and goes home and feels dreadful about that subject and doesn't want to learn any more about it because they feel like there's no hope. So the problem, of course, is that you can't give every kid a completely personalized exam, or at least when I was teaching, you couldn't. It would take forever.
Mm.
But I think one of the most exciting opportunities I've seen is the ability to use testing not as a means to order children and to put them on a sort of hierarchical list of you're the best, you're the worst, but to say to kids, look, you're going to get around 70 to 80% in this test, but let's focus on the 20% that you're going to get wrong.
Yeah,
And it just, every test is like hyper personalized to them.
yeah,
Like, how cool would that be?
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we at ARC are particularly good at is looking at question level analysis. So whether you could have different levels of understanding within different core topics, and
Mm,
rather than just having one blanket question for every pupil, as you say, having the ability to have varying levels of technicality to that core understanding that fits the individual needs of the pupil would be incredibly powerful. I think it would.
mm,
One of I remember going back 10 years or more, when pupils used to come to secondary school with very, very inflated key stage 2 grades. So when they leave, when they're 11 and they leave primary and go into secondary, and they would do their assessments in secondary, and they would always get the lowest marks you could possibly, progress scores you could possibly imagine.
mm.
And you just see these kids are demoralized all the time.
Yeah.
I think this could be a potential way to raise, like you say, to remove
Mm,
that demoralizing feeling that one gets from, like you said, not being brave enough to put your hand up to ask a question in some circumstances, not being brave enough to seek help,
yeah.
and not always be looking at the league table, for want of a phrase, and finding yourself at the bottom of it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no one wins, do they? If you've got that sort of that end of the spectrum where you're not catering for the top students, you're not catering for the bottom students, you're always catering for the middle.
Mm,
And I think what I'd love to see is a move towards catering for everyone by ensuring that the examination isn't there for ordering, but it's there for each individual student to know the test moves with them. Basically, the exam moves with them as they go through their education, and it's not a fixed exam that we're marking against. We've got the ability to do that,
mhm,
and it's like you mentioned right at the start. We used to be in a stage where the data simply wasn't there. People, like teachers, were capturing stuff in written bits of paper. If you're lucky, a spreadsheet that was saved locally. But now it feels like with the more advanced MIS systems that are out there, we've got the data, so that's tick in that box. What I guess has been lacking is the AI component and
mm,
or just any sort of predictive analytics. But now it feels like we're in a place where we've got both of these things turbocharged up, and we need to find a way to get them to overlap and really, embody in the classroom this sense of this technology is here for you. It's not here to sort of grade you or test you. It's here to help you learn in a way that is going to set you up for the best possible life you can have.
yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you as well is around data privacy. I think a lot of teachers and educational establishments are a bit concerned really about these tools not really declaring much about their data privacy and data security, and sort of saying, well, use it if you want, but we're not really going to sort of set it up in a way that's very friendly to as someone like a teacher who's just using this to help them in the classroom. Like, should they be putting student data in, etc. So what would your guidance be to teachers wanting to experiment with this technology, but are a bit unsure about what they can and can't be using it for?
It's a very good question. I think, even reflecting on my time in education, I think what I would say as a sector is we've become much more data aware of data protection. When I first started, things were pinged around on emails and spreadsheets and, like you say, bits of paper, and we are much more conscious of that now. If you're an individual teacher in a school who's looking to explore in this thing, the thing I would always say is put yourselves in the shoes of the person that you're, the data subject, and try and anonymize things where you possibly can. All our pupils have UPN numbers,
Mm.
or unique pupil numbers, they're called. So I would definitely do that. And I think what people might not realize is there is such a fantastic community of people out there. No matter
Mm-hmm.
what area of education you're working, whether that be on the data and IT side or in the teaching side, LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, there's some fantastic people out there. Just reach out to them and say, I've got this idea. What are
Mm-hmm.
people doing? I think that's something that would, you can almost spark a community yourself. Um, and people are always willing to engage. People are always willing to listen. I think one of the massive benefits of the multi-academy trust model is that there are people out there just like you within the same organisation that have got the same, sort of same ideas, but the same desires, and the same passion to improve. In terms of data bias, that's probably the one thing that does concern me a little bit. Again, going back to when I very, very first started in education, there was this perception that if you were from a particular background or you were from, particularly an ethnic background, that you weren't going to achieve. And
Mm.
statistically, that's true. In some instances, statistically, that's true. And it's about, but there are some schools and there are some multi-academy trusts that have the ability somehow to remove that bias in their results, and they achieve great outcomes for those pupils. And how do we teach AI, when we're using it to look for patterns and improvements in our own performance, to recognize that, yes, there is a national underperformance for these particular groups, but for want of a better phrase, we don't have that.
Mm.
We're colorblind to these kids, or we don't say this. We don't care what background they come from. They will all achieve, irrespective of
Mm-hmm.
their background or ethnicity. They will achieve, and I don't know how. I don't know, because I'm not an expert in AI. I don't know how we teach AI to have that same
Mm.
desire or that same aspiration that we might have for the pupils that we serve.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose then, it's up to the teachers to kind of use these tools in a way at the moment that kind of feels like that they would use it in the same way as any other tool that they're putting student data into. Just because it's AI and it's smart and it's the new thing, they shouldn't treat it with um, any less care than they would do, say, if they're putting student data into any other tool, and that it needs to be signed off by their IT team. And I guess they would basically be talking with their own internal teams, but also, like you say, going externally to forums and opening the conversation up. Because I guess, would you say then that it's through those kind of conversations that we get to the point where we can say, okay, this is how we should be using it, and this is a model that's worked well for us. So, in terms of training and development for internal members of staff, I think a lot of IT staff are hearing about these new technologies like generative AI and wanting to dip their toe into the water. Perhaps they've played around with stuff like ChatGPT personally, and I'm sure you'd agree there's a big leap to then taking it into their professional job and their livelihood. Would you say we need to kind of start thinking about how we train and develop staff to use these tools responsibly and ethically? And do you know of any sort of things that have been put in place that have worked well for that in the past?
It's another great question. I think there's an opportunity there for us, definitely, to use this as a way for enriching CPD, or even identifying where CPD is needed. My head of IT, Adam Taylor, has developed this fantastic thing for us where we have a skills and competency framework, and he's built these spider diagrams, and it looks fantastic. But that's all based on information that we can capture. Some of it might be subjective, some of it might, there's a lot of work that goes into it. If we can harness AI as a way of supporting our our team members to understand their core skills and core competencies better, and recommend the right training that they need. Sometimes when it comes to training, we don't always know the art of the possible. So that, I don't know, could AI recommend the right training for specific individuals that got specific roles within a technology team? What you would expect your network manager to understand is very different from what you would expect your IT technician to know. So can it create, going back to the pupil example, can it create personalized learning plans for colleagues, much in the same way we would like them to do it for our pupils? In terms of using it or training them to use it as a tool, I think in some ways I see ChatGPT a little bit like an iPhone, in the fact that as soon as you take it out of the box, you never read the instructions, do you? You just get on with it and you play with it. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to learn. As I said to you before, I've used it myself I haven't used it to write a presentation. I'm probably not clever enough to do that. I've used it to sense check some of the content. And where I've made an argument, I've actually asked it, what's your opinion on this? And if it's come back and given me a similar answer, at least I know I'm on the right lines. And I've done it where I've flipped it around. I've changed the question so that it looks like I'm more in favour of one than the other, and it still come back with the same answer that it came with before. So I don't want to enforce it with any of my own bias in there. So I think that's probably an important thing. I was quite reassured to see it came back with it kept its own opinion, which was interesting. I think there are other things in there that potentially again, this is really curveball, but could it be something that people could use to help with their mental health? Could it, again, when you talk about that pupil thing, when people are too afraid to ask for help, is there a way that it can be embraced for people to ask for help if they're dealing with a difficult situation at work, or if they've got a manager or a leader that they're not connecting with properly for tools? Can you use it as a way to improve as a leader for you to improve your leadership skills and your active listening skills and things like that? I think it all comes down to whether or not you've got the aptitude to, like we said right at the beginning, to embrace this technology and to see it as being part of your day-to-day life, or do you just see it as something a bit like Google that you go to when you're in a pub quiz and you want to have a bit of a cheat?
Yeah, that's a really astute point that you made there around the fact that it's like an iPhone. You get it out of the box and you use it. There's no docs that come with ChatGPT. No. It just presents you with that prompt and it says, "What do you want to do?" So, I think that speaks volumes about the power of the tool, because if the best tools are the ones that you don't need to read the manual for before you use them. So if it's that intuitive, it must have really struck a chord with the public.
I would say that, David, about some of the MIS out there at the moment. I think Bromcom and Arbor, in particular, the two that I've used most recently, Bromcom and Arbor, we do a lot of training. I know we're going off the topic of AI, but we do a lot of training for non-teaching colleagues in schools for them to use the real power of the systems. But when you're a teacher, we barely train them. We just about show them how to log in, because the systems that they've built, both of them, and I praise them both. They've built technologies that are really intuitive. And I think that's led to people being a lot more comfortable around data. The old systems, or having it on paper, meant that people, it became in some ways disparate and difficult to embrace. And it's not the case anymore. With technology like ChatGPT coming along, I think society is a lot more comfortable exploring technology than it was before. I think, just the technological leaps that we made in the last 10 years. I was saying to someone recently, if you gave a Game Boy to one of my kids, they'd probably cry. If you gave a Game Boy to me and you when we were kids, we would have been jumping around the street. Technology has evolved at such pace, and we're talking about a product that you think you've said has been around for 5 months. I'm sure it's been used in universities and stuff for much longer, but for the public, for the last 5 months. And you've got that. I think you've got like 3 streams. You've got people that are wary of it and don't really want to get involved. You've got people like myself that are dipping their toe in but aren't, really. You've got the bigger risk of the people that think they're overnight experts and are telling everyone what to do. And then you've got people like yourselves who genuinely know what it can do and can help us, like people like myself who are interested in what the art of the possible is and how we can use this technology to take us to the next level.
Yeah. Just thinking about that you said there, it changes the way that we interface with data. That's a really good point, I think, not just in education, but across the board. before to interface with data, we're talking about learning a programming language
Mhm.
or building a tool, a whole system that allows you to do things. But it's not flexible to what you actually want to do. You're fixed to what the tool is allowing you to do. But I guess what these tools open up is the possibility that you can interact and talk to your data as if it were a human. And that is so powerful for teachers or for anybody who wants to, who has a love for using data, but doesn't want to have to learn the tools like, querying a database
Yeah.
or writing an application. That it becomes its own entity. Data is just another part of your organization that you can have a chat with. I mean, what a powerful idea that is. Which perhaps brings me to my last question, which is, where do you think the future of this is going? The next decade. I mean, it's hard enough at the moment to look to the next month, let alone the next decade. But if we had this conversation in 10 years' time, what do you think we'd be talking about?
I think undoubtedly it's going to play a bigger part in the classroom than we could probably ever imagine. I think it will take us back to that ability for us to articulate verbally our understanding of a topic or of something. I think in the short term, I think it'll have a bigger impact, like I said before, on FE and HE than it will lower down the education year groups. But without a doubt, it's coming. I think, as you said, what I'd like to hope is that we use this technology, as you said, to improve social mobility, to close the disadvantage gap, both in terms of economic disadvantage and special needs. My biggest hope is that we use it as a tool to reduce workload on staff. And by that, I really passionately mean this as well. I don't want that to people to think that by reducing workload, you can reduce headcount. I think reducing workload means that you free people up from administrative burdens and allow them to concentrate on that human interpersonal side, on the pastoral care, on being on the gate on a morning. I think I don't think people realise how powerful it is that if you come from a background that's less stable, having that person on the gate when you come into school, that one constant in your life that you know is going to be there, and when you come into school, that people, I mean, they do. I mean, the work that people do in schools to support kids is unbelievable. I take my hat off to every one of them. But freeing them up from that admin burden to do that more effectively, I think that's such a powerful tool. And then for me, my own personal passion is obviously the analytics side of things. Just giving us those golden threads, giving us the ability to triangulate much more effectively, giving us the ability to bring information in from other sources much more effectively. So one of the things that I'd love to see, David, is, again, that person on the gate stood there with an iPad. They know that there's an issue on the district line, so these 25 kids are going to be late, and it tells them instantly. Or Johnny comes in and says, "I'm really sorry, the bus was late," and they can look and say, "Well, you only live around the corner, you don't get a bus." Or if it's health, or if it's crime, and that person on the gate is aware of that, and so that they can prepare themselves, mentally and emotionally to deal with that when these kids come in. But that takes us right back to the beginning of this whole journey, is about getting your data right. And can AI help us get our data right? The quality of information that we collect is, from different schools to different schools, I imagine is very wide in terms of quality. Can AI help us to capture the right data that we need to really, really make a difference to not just the kids' lives, but to teachers' lives, to all our colleagues' lives, and across the whole sector.
Yeah, and the point you make there about freeing up teachers' time is essential. I mean, that's why people get into the profession, because they want that personal connection to see progress and to see students get to the pinnacle of where they can be. It's not, they don't join the profession to do admin. So I think
honestly, that's one of the powers of the MAP model in the fact that my every day I come into work, I feel that my goal is to remove the burden from teachers so that they can teach and do what they do well, and we do the heavy lifting where we can on all the admin and the compliance. And where we'll be in 10 years on that. I hope we're a long way down the track, and I hope that technology will really help us to be much more effective in the way that we do that.
Yeah, me too. Derek, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and hearing your thoughts on the benefits that generative AI and data in general can have on the education sector. I'm sure our listeners would agree. Best of luck with everything in your future as a director of IT at ARC, and best of luck for your schools and everything you're doing there. I hope you find ways to incorporate generative AI into what you're doing. And thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, David. Pleasure.